Now, the campaign for a second referendum took a big blow this week when Jeremy Corbyn sent out his proposals for Brexit. So when I sat down with Tony Blair yesterday, one of the faces of the People's Vote campaign, I started by asking if this was the week that his dream of a second Brexit referendum died.
No, I think the question of where we go in the future now is very open. I actually thought his letter was helpful in one sense, because the underlying point in his letter was you have to decide what type of Brexit you want before you leave. And this, to me, is the absolute clear thing. I've never thought that you would get to another referendum going directly to it. You'll get to it when people see what the true Brexit alternatives are. And the truth is, there are two. You can have a soft Brexit, which is really what Jeremy Corbyn's suggesting, or you can have the hard Brexit that Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage and other people want. And what I've really been saying all the way through this process is you've got to decide which of those Brexits you want before you leave. Otherwise, you're going to leave without clarity. And if you leave without clarity, no closure. The argument just goes on. And by then you'll have left, you'll have paid your money up front, you'll have given up your negotiating leverage. And for the country to do that, as Theresa May wants to do, to leave without knowing what Brexit you get, this would be, in my view, an incredibly foolish thing for the country to do. It's got to know where we're heading before we leave.
I just don't understand how you get to a second referendum, because you can't get to there without the support of the leader of the opposition. I can't see how that happens. And if you look at what he's saying in this letter, our first priority must be a deal that's best for jobs and living standards, and he's talking about the aim of securing a sensible agreement. I mean, this does not sound like a man who is about to back a second referendum. That sounds like a man who wants a Brexit deal to pass the House of Commons.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. That is what he wants. But here's the thing. I think Theresa May will reject that letter. Indeed, in a sense, already has. And the soft Brexit that he's proposing, once you start to focus on that, okay, supposing Parliament, as it should do, puts before Parliament for a vote the different Brexit options, because you've essentially got two. You've got a soft Brexit option, which is what Jeremy Corbyn's suggesting. That keeps you in a position more or less like Norway is at the moment. Or you have a harder Brexit option. You go out of the trading system of the European Union. You have a free trade agreement like Canada. So you've got soft versus hard. Once you actually get to deciding which of those propositions you want, it's at that point that my suspicion is ultimately there'll be no support for either of them. And then you get to another referendum. And you, by the way, you may get to another referendum in order to say to the country, look, now we have a firm Brexit deal. Do you prefer that to staying?
If we do leave on March the 29th, is that it? Or is there a possibility we might rejoin?
I think, look, there's some people think, you can leave on March the 29th, and then you go into a long transition period. Maybe you try and rejoin during that time. I think that's highly unlikely. I think what will happen once you leave is you're out, and that will be it for a generation at least.
To coin a phrase from Donald Tusk, do you think there's a special place in hell for a Labour Party that facilitates Brexit?
Well, I don't think it's wise for the Labour Party to facilitate Brexit, because I don't think it's in the interest of the country. And, one of the things I find most curious at one level, although I kind of get it at another level, is when I talk to Labour MPs and Leave constituencies who are backing Brexit, and you will say to them, okay, I know all the problems you've got in your constituencies, high levels of unemployment, poor levels of education, poor infrastructure, lack of investment. How do you think Brexit is going to make these problems better? And they will usually say, I don't think they're going to make them better, but the people voted for it, and therefore I feel I've got to vote for it too.
Donald Tusk said this week that today there's no political force and no effective leadership for Remain. And he's right, isn't he? There's a problem, isn't there? That the face of the people's vote is yourself, it's Chukwu Muna, it's the PR boss Roland Rudd live from Davos. I mean, you're not really doing much to challenge the perception that this is a movement from the metropolitan liberal elite.
This is an argument we've just got to be really robust about. I mean, 60 million people voted to Remain. I mean, they're not all members of the metropolitan elite. And by the way, there are members of the metropolitan elite on the other side of the debate, and very wealthy people on the other side of the debate. This is a nonsense. The question is what's in the interest of the country. And the country voted to leave, but it didn't vote as to what form of Brexit. And it's a bit like having a general election where the question is, do you like the government? If that was the question, very few governments would get re-elected. Governments get re-elected when it's, do you like the government or do you prefer the opposition? And this is why what is important is that before we leave, we get the clarity. And for the British people, you know, I'm intensely aware from the conversations that I've had with people, you know, there is a degree of alarm, boredom, resignation over Brexit. Most people probably think, look, we voted for it, just get on with it. And this is, of course, where parliamentary democracy matters, because really what's happening is once Parliament studies it, it's saying, well, hang on, it's not just a question of getting on with it. Do you want a soft Brexit or do you want a hard Brexit? And this essential dilemma is the thing that has made this negotiation so extraordinary over the last 30 months, because essentially the government, because the cabinet can't agree and the government can't agree, they've never made that choice.
I want to talk to you about Ireland as well, because you were, of course, involved in the Good Friday Agreement, and you understand more than most the sensitivities in Ireland and Northern Ireland. So, from your perspective, if we have a no-deal Brexit, will there be a hard border?
Yes, for sure. If we have a no-deal Brexit, I mean, no one could responsibly propose this. It would be economically very, very dangerous for Britain and for the peace process in Ireland. It would potentially be devastating. You would have a hard border, very hard border. I mean, a no-deal Brexit means a really hard border between North and South in Ireland. It's contrary to the Good Friday Agreement, and it will cause an enormous fissure within the United Kingdom.
What would the impact of that hard border be?
Well, the impact will be that the thing that has been in existence since almost 100 years of the Republic of Ireland's, you know, creation as an independent state, that border that's been open for that length of time, and when Britain and Ireland have always been in the same relationship to Europe as each other, that will end. You'll end up with real problems at the border, huge economic problems south and north, and I mean a very, very bitter atmosphere. No, nobody responsible could propose a no-deal Brexit. And that's why I think even if there isn't a parliamentary majority at the moment for a particular form of Brexit, or indeed for another referendum, there's definitely a parliamentary majority against no deal. And I really do believe there are people within the cabinet who are sufficiently serious and responsible not to allow that to happen.
Do you think that some politicians are playing fast and loose then with the peace process?
Well, I think they've been playing fast and loose with it from the very beginning. I mean, those people who cheerfully say that you can put the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland in a completely different relationship with Europe in trading terms, and it make no difference to the economy of the north of Ireland. I mean, I don't know on what basis they possibly say that.
I'm keen to talk to you about the Labour Party as well, because several MPs have been expressing their unhappiness with the way the party's been dealing with allegations of anti-Semitism. And this week, Jenny Formby, the General Secretary, said it's impossible to completely eradicate anti-Semitism from the party. Is she right? And does the left have a blind spot when it comes to anti-Semitism?
No and yes. Of course we should eradicate anti-Semitism from the Labour Party. I mean, we're supposed to be a progressive political party. How can we say it's tolerable to have a certain level of anti-Semitism in the party? Would we say more generally it's tolerable to have a level of racism within the Labour Party? No, we'd say, I mean, of course you can't have that. And, you know, yes, there are parts of the left, not the whole of the left, but there are parts of the left that do have a problem with anti-Semitism. And you see this in their attitudes to the State of Israel. You can make all sorts of criticisms of the State of Israel, but their continual focusing on Israel all the time, you know, over a long period, you're left with the feeling that they're, in a sense, targeting it because it is a Jewish state.
Has the leadership been robust enough on this?
No, it's not been robust enough on it. And you know, it's the fact that someone like Luciana Berger, who's a, you know, smart, capable, active member of parliament doing her best for her constituents, the fact that she should even be subject to a no-confidence motion with this type of allegations swirling around is shameful for the Labour Party.
I mean, should that constituency party be suspended, as Tom Watson has called for?
Well, I think that what Tom's saying is absolutely right. I back him 100% on it. I mean, look, can you imagine when I was leader of the Labour Party having a conversation with me about whether anti-Semitism was in the Labour Party or not? I would have thought, we wouldn't even have that conversation. And there is, I'm afraid, there is a kind of nascent alliance between what I would call bits of the sort of Islamist type of politics and the left. And you can see this not just here in the UK, you can see it across Europe. And it's, yes, it gives rise to anti-Semitism. It's not your traditional anti-Semitism of the old kind of right-wing nature of, not wanting Jewish people in golf clubs and that type of thing. But it's every bit as pernicious. And, to have a situation where you've got Labour MPs worried because they happen to be Jewish,
I'm keen to talk to you about foreign affairs as well. We're close to the anniversary of the Iranian Revolution. How do you think the West should be dealing with Iran today?
If you look at the 40 years of the Iranian Revolution, what's interesting, and what my institute has been doing kind of expresses this, is that ideology, is still very powerful. I think it's more sensible to view Iran as an ideology with a state than a state with an ideology. And they've been exporting it around the region for 40 years. It's probably, the policies of the Iranian regime, I think, are probably the single most destabilizing, have the most destabilizing consequence on the Middle East of anything that's happening today. And I think that this issue of how we deal with Iran, we've kind of oscillated between containment and confrontation. And what we need, I think, is a policy in the West today in dealing with Iran, which accepts the ideology hasn't changed, which accepts the nature of the regime, and which, where they're using hard power, confronts it, and where they're using soft power, contains it and exposes it.
So what does that mean, though? How do we do that? Are you talking about keeping military intervention on the table? What do you want to see?
I don't think you should take any option off the table, but obviously, the best thing that could happen is that there's peaceful change within Iran, because the Iranian people are educated people. They're people who want to be connected with the world. If there was a free and fair election in Iran, I doubt very much whether the regime would stand any chance of winning it. So that's what we hope for. But in the meantime, you've got to push back. This is why I regret the decision the Americans took in relation to Syria. I think it's extremely important that we support the new leadership in Iraq, which basically wants to assert the independence of their country and should be able to do so.
Do you worry that some of this retreat, some of this isolationism, is because both the UK and the US have been effectively scarred from Iraq?
Well, yes, of course it's a question for us, but we should also think, today's circumstances are completely different from what they were 15, 16 years ago. And we should recognize that this power of Iran, whether you look at Syria, Yemen, Iraq, if you look at, for example, their support of the most extreme groups in Palestinian politics rather than support for a two-state solution and peace on both sides, this is the nature of the regime. Now, really what I'm saying is 40 years on from the revolution, we've got to be clear-eyed about how we view this.
Well, being clear-eyed about this as well, though, is recognising that if we're serious about trying to tackle Iran, then we're effectively siding with their rivals in the region, Saudi Arabia. Some of our viewers as well, it's in the public domain, may be questioning the fact that the Tony Blair Institute has received money from a group called Media Investment Limited close to the Saudi regime. They may think that this is partly why you're talking out about it.
Yeah, but it's not. The reason I speak about these things is, and I've spoken about the power of Iran for a long period of time, is because it's nothing to do with backing Saudi versus Iran. I also think, by the way, looking at this thing in the prism of Shia versus Sunni is also wrong. The fact is, there's one big struggle across the Middle East today. It's can the societies in the Middle East, where religion has been abused for a long period of time, Sunni and Shia, can those societies become religiously tolerant? Can their economies become rule-based? That's the central question. And it's not about whether it's you back the Sunni side versus the Shia side. Actually, most of these countries, for example, in the Gulf, have got significant Shia minority populations. The question is, that Islamist ideology, whether it's of the Sunni version, Muslim Brotherhood through to ISIS, the Shia version represented by the Islamic State of Iran, the question is, how do you defeat that and end up with a region in which people are educated to be open-minded, connected with the world, and where their economies can function on the basis of rules and not corruption or cronyism.
Now, just before we end the interview, there was one question that I was quite keen to ask you while I've got you with us. In your memoir, you wrote, "I've always been more interested in religion than politics." It's quite an astonishing thing for a former Prime Minister to say. What did you mean by that?
Well, I wasn't expecting that question.
Yeah,
but
a bit of a curveball, but it's something that I've been wondering.
No, I think the place of faith in society is really important. And I think the challenge, I am really interested in religion. I'm interested in studying different religions. And I'm interested in whether it's possible to reconcile faith with the modern world. Now, I think it is, but not on the basis of a religion that is doctrinal or exclusivist. And I think if faith departs from society, if we kind of say, well, look, that's just part of the old-fashioned way of looking at the world, I think it would be, if you lose the concept of faith from society, it's tragic. But I don't think you can, I think religion has no future unless it understands that it's got to be rooted in the modern world. And the risk is, faith operates in two different ways in the world today. One is as a source of compassion and a stimulus for progress in humanity. And the other is, look, this is my faith, and if you're not like me, then you're my enemy. So these are the two, challenges. And I see this in the Middle East all the time, of course. So I am fascinated by, by religion. I'm also interested in politics, by the way.
Yeah, well, we've got that as well.
Yeah.
And do you think it gives you something in common with Theresa May? Her faith's important to her.
Well, I guess, look, people who are of faith hold that in common with each other. And by the way, it's really one of the things that I think is really important about politics. This is not necessarily to do with religion. You should be able to disagree with someone in politics without considering them either badly motivated, evil, or people you want nothing to do with. And so when I have this complete disagreement with Theresa May over Brexit, it doesn't mean to say I think she's a bad person or badly motivated.
Have you spoken to her since she became Prime Minister?
I have spoken to her, but not about Brexit. I'd be perfectly happy to, by the way, but I think we probably...
What about then?
About Brexit?
What have you spoken to her about?
I think that should remain between us, but it wasn't about Brexit.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
My interview there with Tony Blair.